Texas. Beto O'Rourke grew up in El Paso, spent 6 years, I believe, on the El Paso City Council, then another 6 years in the U.S. House from 2012 through 2018, and came so close to unseating the nefarious Ted Cruz in his Senate race last cycle. And in that race, he made so many waves, and I knew who he was beforehand, but like so many in this room, I'm sure, I saw the video of Beto talking about his view on football players kneeling during the national anthem. And how he viewed that as something that, even though reasonable people could disagree, that there was nothing more American than civil, respectful protest of injustice. And when I saw that, I said, that reminds me of something. It reminds me of someone who's trying to help us find our way in this country. So I started learning more about his background, and his oldest son's name is Ulysses, which is, if you don't know, it's the Roman name for Odysseus, the hero of the Odyssey, which is, I understand, maybe his favorite work of classical literature.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think, our country is in a bit of an odyssey right now. We have lost, we're trying to find our way home again, just like Odysseus. We have a pretender in the White House, in Donald Trump, who's a lot like the suitors in Ithaca who want Penelope, the people, to accept him. Odysseus is never coming home. But when I saw that video of Beto, and I learned more about him, I thought, he just might be the one who can come back, lead us back to Ithaca, string the bow, and show us our way home again. So with that, I want to welcome Beto O'Rourke.
Brother, thank you very much. That's one of the best introductions that we've received anywhere in any part of the country, and so thank you. That was really powerful. Thank you very much. To Ben and Curbs Tavern, thank you for hosting us. Nothing wrong with drinking a beer on a Thursday morning. But enjoy it responsibly. I understand that we have the police chief here with us as well. And thank you, sir, for your service, and to the women and men who serve with you to keep this community and this state and this country so safe. Huge honor to be with you all. Thank you for taking some time out of your day, out of this morning, to participate in your democracy. I am getting the feeling, 19 or 20 days into this race, that the people of Iowa take this very seriously. Your role in vetting those of us who contend for this position of honor and trust to help lead the country at this very decisive and maybe perilous moment, to help all of us come together to bring this country through some very treacherous times. So many millions of our fellow Americans unable to see a doctor or afford a prescription or participate in a meaningful way in this economy, or get the kind of education that they need as we take money away from our public schools, away from our public school teachers, force them to work 2 and 3 jobs, and provide a disincentive to the next generation to enter that classroom, answer that calling, and perform that essential public service. Climate change, beyond the shadow of a doubt, if you will listen to the scientists, and I think all of us here hopefully do, 1 degree Celsius change already just since 1980. The fires, the droughts, and yes, the floods spilling over the banks of the Missouri River, in part connected to our own excesses, our own emissions, and our own inaction in the face of that. Those same scientists give us 10 years, más o menos, to do everything we can while we still can to get this right. And yet we are the one country that has withdrawn itself, not just from the Paris Climate Agreement, but from any obligation to the next generation. We used to be the indispensable country, the sole country on the planet that could bring the other countries together around otherwise intractable problems. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to come together? Some thoughts. Woke up this morning at the sleep-in Ames, Iowa. Went for a run. Wasn't raining. It had just rained. It was about to rain. Was going down a suburban street. Homes had just recently been built. Most of them looked like the one right next to them. Was trying to get something different, so I ran down a side street and found a little river trail that allowed me to go along a creek, kind of get lost in this neighborhood, but really get lost. Came out of that river trail system with all these houses looking the same, the street looked the same as the other one that I'd come in on. I had no idea where I was. And Cynthia, we got some folks in the back. Asked a young boy who was waiting for the school bus if he could tell me how I get to the sleep in. Now, if I was 12 years old in El Paso and someone asked me how to get to the sleep in, I wouldn't know either. But he said, this road right here that you're going on is a dead end, so you might want to take this road, which will get you to, more likely to get you to one of those main streets. Was able to get back, got that good run in, probably another 15 minutes more out on the trail than I expected to be. But I come back to the hotel and I'm reading the Ames paper, and one of the lead stories is farmers helping farmers. And it talked about farmers in Story County, was the story in this case, who were loading up bales of hay and feed and taking them across the border to Nebraska to help farmers who were still recovering from those floods there. From infrastructure that was not invested in, from climate change that is taking its toll, from a government that cannot yet pass full disaster relief funding, and even if they do, it looks like it will not make up for the stored grain that has been damaged and spoiled in these floods. Grain that is not insured, grain that in some cases is being stored because we're in a trade war, not of the making of the people of Iowa or Nebraska. Tariffs that we've exacted that have produced reciprocal tariffs that have closed down markets for those soybeans, for that corn, and in some cases that biofuel. Used to be able to find another home and a buyer willing to pay. But it's farmers who are doing the work right now in the face of the inaction of the federal government. Now, Democrats used to be the party for rural America. The little gal, the little guy, the farmer, the rancher in Texas, the producer, those who feed and clothe not just this community, not just this country, but so much of the rest of the world. I learned a little bit about that traveling Texas. 254 counties. Some of the most rural places in the country, some of the most urban places in the country. I remember going to a place called Silverton, Texas, and we learned along the trail that half of rural Texas could not get online. There was not reliable broadband internet. And folks would ask me, try looking for a job, or finishing your education, or starting a business, or finding those markets for the wheat that you're growing, or the cotton that you're ginning in Texas, or the corn that you're raising here, if you cannot get online. It's nearly impossible. And as I talked about cooperating and partnering with rural America, making investments in infrastructure like broadband internet, this gentleman stood up in the library of Silverton, Texas, and he said, I'm old enough to have been in first grade in 1937. And our community back then did not have electricity. Before that first day of first grade, I could not read by electric light like the kids in Dallas or Chicago or Tokyo or London. But thanks to FDR and then Congressman Lyndon Baines Johnson and the Rural Electrification Administration, a federal government willing to partner with a cooperative that we set up in this community, we were lit up just like the rest of the world. And I too could read at night and get ahead just like those other kids. Somebody believed in us and was willing to partner with us and was willing to help us. And he said, you can believe from that day forward, my daddy was a yellow dog Democrat. Because Democrats had shown up and they had delivered and they had come through. And so right now when we think about rural America does not need handouts, does not need help from the federal government in the form of just more blanket investment or dollars that are spent. It doesn't need anybody's sympathy or pity. It needs a partner. It needs a partner in the investment in infrastructure along the banks of the Missouri River. It needs a partner who can be there when no one else can. When we have storm, devastation, and flooding like we are seeing right now. It needs a partner to invest in infrastructure like we did with the REA in in 1936 and in 1937. We need that today in 2019 and 2020. And what I am hearing from farmers and their kids and the next generation who want to inherit those farms and not see them subdivided into tract housing like the tract housing I just ran through in Ames, Iowa, pass that on to the next generation, is they want to make a profit, which is not too much to ask, considering our food security and the food security of so much of the rest of the world, considering the fact that farmers in Iowa have freed us at least from 10% of our demand on fossil fuels to power our cars, and they can do even more. They're adding value to the crops that they raise, freeing themselves from commodity markets to whom they were captive before. And right now, this challenge of climate change, they want to do their part as well. And they've come up, as they always have, with their own solutions to our shared challenges and problems. Planting cover crops that capture more of that carbon out of the air so we have a better chance of meeting our obligations and our goals in these very ambitious targets. Precision tilling and farming so that we disturb less of the soil and release less carbon coming forward. Making sure that we open up markets and technologies to make it profitable for farmers to do what they have always done and now to contribute in a way that they've never been able to before. This is our opportunity, not as a party, not for me as a candidate, but as a country to bring forth the very best from every single one of us, regardless of where we live. Imagine this. At our most divided moment, perhaps going all the way back to 1860, at a very polarized time in this country, defined by its hyper-partisanship, what if we were able to come together around these shared challenges with charity for all, expecting the best from every single one of us, never ascribing motive, and saying, I want you to be able to do your part. And in order to do so, not only are we going to partner with you where you live, we're going to make sure that you're well enough to perform your role. So when we talk about universal, guaranteed, high-quality healthcare, I just want to make sure that your child has been able to see that therapist so that she's well enough to go to school the next day and learn to her full potential. I want to make sure that you are able to see a doctor so that you can go to work that next day, or write a poem, or start a business, or farm that land. I want to make sure that you're well enough to raise your kids and give them an even better future than you've had in your life. That's universal health care. When I talk about an economy that works for all, I want to make sure that one job is enough for every single one of us. That you're paid enough 40 hours a week that you don't have to take on another job for 20 or 30 or an additional 40 hours a week so that you can read to your child by electric light before that first day of first grade so they have every chance of getting ahead in their lives just like the other kids from other communities whose parents only have to work that one job. I want to make sure that there's paid family leave. So if you have to take care of your folks or yourself or raise that child, you have the means to do it and it does not cost you your job. And I want to make sure, when we're talking about including and pulling in everyone in this country, we're also talking about our democracy. And I say this as a man who comes from a state that recently was 50th in the country in voter turnout. Not because we love our democracy any less than you do here in Iowa, but we were drawn that way by a state legislature that sought to keep some out of their representative government solely based on the color of their skin or their country of national origin. We were also a state that was written off, thought to be too red to contend or to matter or to have a seat at the table in statewide or national elections. But the race that I just got to be a part of, the movement that I was able to join in Texas, absolutely transformed that. We went to every single one of those counties, no matter how red and rural, no matter how blue and urban. Everyone counts, everyone matters, so no one was written off. And no one was taken for granted. And importantly, no one felt written off or taken for granted. Young voter turnout in 2018 in Texas, up 500%. We won the votes of independents and Republicans and expanded Democratic participation as well. We brought more people into the success of our democracy in Texas, by extension, the country. more power and ingenuity and creativity brought to bear on these challenges that I'm describing right now. Though I did not win that race, despite coming awfully close, 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats, representing districts long held by Republicans, a change in the composition of the state legislature in Texas, getting us towards more of a bipartisan government that will represent and reflect everyone. In Harris County, Houston, Texas, 17 African American women elected to judicial positions of trust and power, changing the face of criminal justice in the most diverse city in the United States of America. So a full economic and political democracy that gives everyone the chance to contribute, everyone the chance to vote, and ensure that their leadership, their values are reflected in the policies of our country. Not just good for our party or a given candidate, it's exactly what the United States of America needs right now. If it is universal health care, if it is economic opportunity, if it is immigration, in a country of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over, nearly 1 million young people known as dreamers who really know no other country but this one, and yet live in a constant fear of deportation back to a country they've never known, whose language they don't speak. We can do the right thing, not only freeing them from that fear by making them U.S. citizens, but recognizing that the success of Carroll, of El Paso, and of Ames, and almost every single community in this country is contingent on its renewal through immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees who are called to us and make their home here among us. We were in a small community called La Mesa in Texas during the Senate race, meeting with a cotton grower, a Republican, not likely to vote for me in the election, although I haven't called him back since then to find out how he voted. And he was telling us as we were touring his field, and he was talking about some of the challenges of growing cotton in West Texas, that he has a regular Sunday morning group with whom he meets, perhaps at a place like this one. All of them also Republicans, all of them from La Mesa, and many of them complaining about immigration to this country and how it is taking jobs and opportunities, and that we've got to build that 2,000-mile wall and shut it down. And this gentleman with whom we were meeting said that he asked his colleagues, his friends, have any of you ever had a job taken by an immigrant? And they all said no. Have your kids, a nephew, a second cousin, thrice removed, had a job taken by an immigrant? Well, no, not that I can think of. And actually the story is quite to the contrary. I was just talking to a guy named J.D. Schulten. I don't know if you all know J.D. And as I was sharing this La Mesa anecdote with him, he was telling me about Greene County, where as they were trying to harvest the grain, there were 38 jobs that needed to be filled, and they could find nobody from the community, nobody born in Iowa or the United States to do that work that was necessary for those farmers, for that community, for this state, for this country, and again, because we feed the world for the world. Talking to a rancher in Marathon, Texas, says no matter what I pay per hour or the hours that we set, can find no one born in Marathon or in Texas to do that work. It's the cotton gins and the cotton fields in Texas as well. Let's face it, some of the toughest, most back-breaking work that is done in this country, and there are millions of our fellow Americans who do not have citizenship, who live in the shadows, who are performing that work, and by extension, making us the most successful country on the face of the planet. Now, whether we are compelled by the moral imperative of doing the right thing while it's right in front of our face, or whether it is our own self-interest to continue to be the world's dominant economy, we have an interest in making sure we bring those people out of the shadows, allow them to get right with the law, and on a path to contribute even more to our success. A 2,000-mile wall that will cost you $30 billion at a time of record safety in communities like El Paso, Texas, and other border communities. And at a moment when those who are attempting to come to the United States are kids, If they're lucky, their kids with their parents, fleeing some of the most violent, some of the most brutal, some of the most crushing places on the planet today, doing what you or I would do for our kids if we were faced with the same set of conditions. This is going to be a moment of truth for us, about which our kids and grandkids will read about and the generations that follow. On all of these scores, from climate to healthcare, to partnering with rural America, to the inclusiveness of our economy, to bringing immigrants out of the shadows and able to contribute to their full potential in this country, this is going to be our moment of truth, and we cannot be found wanting. That is why I'm here with you today. I just checked in with Amy about Ulysses, who's 12 years old, Molly, who's 10, Henry, who's 8, knowing that for the better part of 2 years, if we are successful in this endeavor, we'll not be seeing them that much, because in 10 years, in 15 years, in 30 years, it is their judgment that I will face and that I fear. At this moment, while we still could, what did we do? And that is what has brought us all together here at this moment in Carroll today. I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States of America. And I'm grateful for the chance to be with you. I'm looking forward to answering your questions, hearing your suggestions, gaining the benefit of your guidance in this election and in this race. And if you will, raise a hand. Cynthia Cano, who's got a microphone, will bring it to you, and we'll try to get as many people into the conversation.
Congressman, welcome to Iowa.
Thank you.
And I know you're for tearing down the existing wall, pre-existing wall, and you're basically for open borders. Have you ever met any angel moms here in Iowa? There's a woman by the name of Michelle Root, who lives about 100 miles east of here. And her daughter, Sarah, was killed by a drunk illegal alien right after she graduated from college, like the day, the night of. What would you tell her about your immigration stance?
Thank you. First, I would tell her, through you, if you can get this message to her, that I am deeply sorry for her loss. And I would also share with you that I think I understand the spirit of your question, but the premise of it is incorrect. I'm not for open borders. I do think that there are places where physical barriers along the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexican border makes sense. As a father of 3 living in El Paso, one half of the largest binational community in the hemisphere, connected at the hip with Ciudad Juarez, 3 million from 2 countries speaking 2 languages who come together joined by the Rio Grande River to form one people, far greater than the sum of our parts. If anyone's concerned about border security, it's the father of those 3 kids who are within eyesight of the international border. The way that we meet it is intelligently. You can use a 12th century solution like a wall, which will, by the way, force me to take our fellow Americans' land through eminent domain, their farms, their ranches, their homes from them, because we will not build this wall on the international boundary, which is the center line of the Rio Grande River Channel. We'll build it in some cases miles into the interior of the United States. I partnered not with Democrats, but with a Republican, John Cornyn, to invest in our ports of entry. These are our connections with Mexico, through which trade that originates here passes to markets in Mexico and beyond, where people lawfully and legally travel into the United States. It's connected to millions of jobs throughout this country, and it's also where 90% plus of everyone and everything that ever comes into the country first passes. So Cornyn and I, Republican and Democrat, Senator and House member, work together to improve staffing, technology, and infrastructure at those ports, because these 2 Texans, though we come from different parties and probably don't agree on much else, want to make sure that we honor our first and most important commitment, and that is public safety and security. The best way to do it is at those ports. Another way that we can do it, if we're truly serious about it, is immigration reform. We will be demonstrably safer when we know who is in this country. And right now there are millions. There are millions in those shadows that we know nothing about today. Give them a chance to get right with the law. Come into the light of day. Contribute even more to the success of this country. If they have committed crimes, report them back to their countries of origin. But if they are contributing to the success of our country, they're raising U.S. citizen children, Let's offer them a future here in the United States of America. Those are some of the ways that I answer the border security concerns.
Let you get your drink.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'm glad you're in Iowa. In Iowa, we proudly fly our flag, and on our flag is our motto. It says, "Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain." And I represent a group that sometimes feels that's not true. I'm interested in what you will do to ensure that women have the right to make decisions for themselves about their own bodies and have access to affordable reproductive health care.
Thank you for the question. In Texas, a state that has been successful in closing down more than a quarter of family planning clinics, we're also a state that is gripped by a crisis in maternal mortality that is far deadlier for women of color. And I don't think it is disconnected from the fact that we made it harder for women to get a cervical cancer screening, or to get family planning help, or just to see a provider of any kind, compounded by the fact that we failed to expand Medicaid. Inexplicable at a time that the federal government was willing to pay 100 cents on the dollar of expansion. And so when I talk about this issue in Texas, when I talk about it here today in Carroll, when I talk about it in our next visit, I talk about it as a matter of health and life. We're losing women in this country at a frightening rate. I also want to make sure that, as you mentioned, rights, liberty, and the law, since 1973, Roe versus Wade, it's been the law of the land, that every single woman can make her own decisions about her own body. And so when I talk about universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care, I also mean health care for every single woman to be able to do just that. And so I will continue to stand by that. I will continue to try to listen to and talk with people who may come to a different conclusion, but expand the common ground upon which we stand to make sure that we're talking about health care, we're talking about rights, and we're talking about some of the perverse, unintended consequences of when we restrict a woman's right to choose. Not just the maternal mortality crisis that we see, but Texas, leader in the country now in the rate of repeat teen pregnancy. As people have a harder time getting family planning help, making informed decisions about their body and their health care, we get those outcomes that no one in the state wants to see. So I appreciate you raising the question, and to be clear, I'm for a woman's right to choose. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Seth Johnson, I represent Renewable Energy Group, a small body salt manufacturer in Ralston, Iowa, here, so right outside town. My question is, the Trump administration's latest anti-environmental and anti-rural policy is to secret giveaways to oil industries at the expense of biofuels via the small refinery waivers. If elected, would you bow to any of these practices, help the environment, help rural America, and support the RFS?
Yes, to all those. These small refinery waivers are being granted at an out-of-control pace right now. It's a sop, it's a giveaway to big oil and gas. It reflects the president's disconnect from science. And I thought this was a joke when someone asked me if I would comment on the president suggesting that wind turbines cause cancer. We looked it up. In fact, that's what he said. Let's not necessarily try to understand it, and it's dangerous to ascribe a motive, but we know that it is untrue, and it is also disconnected to the last best chance that we have to get it right, not just for us, but for our kids and for the generations that follow. Those natural disasters, which have a man-made component, our inaction, our emissions, the 1 degree warming we've seen since 1980, we are on a trajectory to warm even more than that unless we change course right now. And those floods will become more frequent, more profound. You will be able to live nowhere close to the Missouri River going forward, or next to the ocean, or in Houston, Texas, we saw 58 inches of rainfall just in 2017. That's the landfall record for rainfall in the United States of America for as long as we've been keeping records. And it is the third 500-year flood in just 5 years. It is taking property, but it is also taking lives. And if we're talking about a wall at our southern border because there are 400,000 apprehensions, many of them kids and moms, imagine the apprehensions when some countries in the Western Hemisphere near the equator no longer support human life. So we have a chance. And actually Iowa, as you just suggested, is taking the lead. I talked about farmers freeing themselves from a dependence on commodity markets over which they have no control, adding value to what they grow. These ethanol plants, which so often are cooperatively owned by the very farmers themselves, high wage, high skill, high value jobs, taking 10% of gasoline off the market, replacing it with corn-based ethanol. That's an accomplishment right there, upon which we should follow. You add to that I think you generate more wind as a share of your total energy portfolio than any other state in the union. Texas generates the most wind in an absolute number altogether. And then you look at the fastest growing jobs in this country today are renewable energy jobs, wind and solar. So not only can we meet our commitment to the next generation by investing in renewable energy and making sure that we do not unfairly subsidize oil and gas, we can also ensure that there is real economic opportunity for every American looking for a job with purpose and function and a real paycheck that allows them to live with dignity. And then, lastly, it allows us to reassert our role on the global stage. We cannot ask the rest of the world, China included, which has 4 times the number of coal-fired plants than does the United States, to do their part if they see us as the lone country not doing ours. Exiting the Paris Climate Agreement, a president who wants to increase the power of oil and gas instead of helping us transition from fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions. So yes, you have my support on that. And yes, I will follow the lead that you have set here in Iowa. It is one upon which we must build. Thank you for the question. Hey there.
Hi, thanks for taking my question.
Sure.
My boss is one of the richest men in the world. He's a billionaire, and he gets credit for only taking $100,000 in salary. And my salary is half that, and I work my butt off all the time. What are you going to do to redistribute wealth from ultra-rich people to people who, working people like myself?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. In my comments at the outset, I was talking about the need to have a true political democracy that can call forth the talent, the expertise, the experience of all Americans, regardless of our differences. It's what we're going to need if we're going to meet these challenges. But the last progressive era, more than 100 years ago, was provoked by the last extraordinary concentration of wealth and power and privilege that you're describing right now. And one of those reformers, Teddy Roosevelt, though he was a Republican, talked about the ability to achieve political democracy being contingent upon the ability to achieve what you just described, economic democracy. Some ability for you and your kids to see a future for themselves in this country. And to acknowledge that where we are right now, current generations are doing less well than the generation that preceded them. That's not been the trajectory of the United States, certainly since post-World War II, until now. And that concentration of power and wealth and privilege just becomes more entrenched, grows ever larger. There's an inertia to power that feeds on the powerless. But this democracy, imperfect though it may be, was designed to be one of the best checks against that inertia of power. You look at the founders and their words as they came up with our Constitution, our way of life. They were trying to escape that concentration of power back on the European continent. The lords and the ladies, the princes and the princesses, they understood for this democracy to succeed, there must also be an economic democracy. And so, much in the same way that the last progressive movement with TR and others, sought to break up those trusts and those monopolies, to embolden and empower unions so that workers could use the value of their labor, what they contribute, to the value of what is sold and to the profit that those corporations make, to obtain better wages and better working conditions for themselves and for everyone else and those who would succeed them. There are some lessons that we can take from that today. I mentioned that one job should be enough. We guarantee at a minimum that every worker in this country is paid $15 an hour. That can begin to be enough for most Americans. If we have paid family leave, so that taking time off to care for your mom or to raise your child or to take care of your own health care does not put you out of work or not allow you to pay the mortgage, that's part of it. Investing in access to higher education at a time of $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, and we add to it with every graduating college senior, on average, $40,000 on their back, and that is just an average. If we stop digging that hole and guarantee free community college, we guarantee debt-free higher education at a public-serving, publicly financed higher education institution, if we strengthen instead of diminish the power of unions to ensure that every graduating high school senior is not just college ready, but career ready with a path to an apprenticeship, and that every older worker whose job has been automated out of existence or is returning to the workforce after having raised their kids has a path to a skill or a trade or a discipline that gives meaning to their lives and also allows them to command that living wage, we will then be closer to achieving that economic democracy that makes political democracy possible. But the last thing, and it's the first thing that you started with, this concentration of wealth, beyond allowing more people to accumulate wealth, how do we break up this inordinate hold on our economy today by so few people and corporations? We have an estate tax in this country that was intended to prevent people from passing on this extraordinary wealth to the next generation, ensuring that there is more opportunity. I think we need to ensure that we increase that estate tax, do more to tax wealth in this country, and acknowledge that some communities in this country, especially African American communities, have been effectively prevented from acquiring any meaningful wealth at large ever since the end of Reconstruction. If you look at the Jim Crow laws, if you look at the effects of segregation, if you look at redlining, if you look at the inability to build wealth by getting a home loan, so many black families were. If you look at the problem of mass incarceration, disproportionately borne by African Americans, especially for nonviolent drug crimes, when all Americans of all races use illegal drugs at roughly the same rate, it is they, more than anyone else, who upon release will be forced to check a box on every job application form, making it less likely that they get that job, will be prevented from student loans that allow them to improve themselves in higher education, thereby preventing them from accumulating wealth and passing that on to the next generation. Wealth that next generation can use as seed capital to start a farm, to start a business, to buy a home for themselves, to pursue their higher education. So equality in economic opportunity, by investing in people and communities, and by breaking up the wealth that has been obtained, sometimes at the cost of other communities who had no opportunity to obtain that same wealth. I think these are some of the ways that we've got to pursue if we're going to get to the answer of your question. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I have, the cost of living has skyrocketed. From education costs to healthcare costs is just a couple that affect me. Long-term care facilities around the United States face closure or are being bought out by bigger companies. And people in my generation that want to go back to school are finding it harder and harder to, and trying to find the American dream is getting harder to achieve. I guess, how are you willing to help people like me afford a college education and the older generation by making sure that they'll have a place to go when the time comes?
Thank you for the questions. I talked a little bit about ensuring that we have free community college and doing a better job of partnering with high schools so that you have 18-year-olds who graduate not just with a high school diploma, but perhaps an associate's degree. We were in a high school in rural Texas, just outside of Sweetwater, a town called Roscoe. And 90% of graduating high school seniors there graduate with an associate's degree that costs them not a dime. They will carry no debt. Some of them graduating with an FAA remote pilot's license, because like Iowa, there are a tremendous amount of wind farms in that community, and some of the maintenance inspections are done by drone, and these young women and men are graduating with the skills, with the licensure, and with the ability to go perform that maintenance, high value, high skill, high wage work at 18 years old. That's part of the way that we stop digging that hole. I was in Fort Madison in Iowa in a welding class, and the instructor there says that there are more people than there are spaces in his class, because those kids graduate with 1 year toward a welding certification under their belt. The next year they'll get at Southeast Iowa Community College, debt-free, because they work with their counselors on scholarships to make sure that they're able to pursue this with costs not being an object. I think we see some paths there to be able to achieve that. I mentioned debt-free higher education, if it's a publicly financed, public-serving educational institution. And then for those who have accrued the debt, at 1.5 trillion, at a minimum, let's refinance more of that at lower rates, and then let's increase the public service loan forgiveness program. And I'll give you an example. There are between 45,000 to 49,000 funded but open positions at the VA. This means that veterans who came back from Vietnam 50 years ago, veterans who will come back from Afghanistan today, are waiting in lines to see a primary care provider or a mental health care provider that in some parts of the country stretch not hours or days, but weeks and months, and sometimes they just give up. 20 deaths of veterans by suicide today, and every single day, as long as this persists. 16 of those 20 were unable or were unwilling, perhaps because of the long wait times, to go to the VA. If you are willing to work as a psychiatrist or psychologist or social worker or primary care provider or some critical role at the VA, that's a public service for which I want to wipe clean the debt that you have accrued. I want to make sure that you can serve those who have served this country, put their lives on the line for America. So that's one way that we can make sure that we reduce that burden that so many are carrying. And then you mentioned long-term care facilities. I want to make sure that that compact that we have with one another, that every single working day of your life you are going to pay in and put in to this country's success, much in the same way that we think about Social Security as the American public's end of that bargain. You paid into it every single working day. We're going to make sure that it is there and that it fulfills 100% of its obligations. If you need greater care, if you need consistent long-term care, I think we need to be there for you as well. And I want to make sure that we make those investments with the states, with the people who understand these issues the best, and especially in rural communities, as we saw across rural Texas, where public hospitals, long-term care facilities, and clinics are closing down by the score. So thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, this is our last question. I'm a parent of 11 and 13-year-old boys, and so as a fellow parent, I'm curious, how do you raise your kids to tell the truth, work hard, not bully others, and in general do the right thing when the leader of our country does not do that on a daily basis?
Thank you. It's a really good question. You know, I cannot think of a more important job for you or for me than to make sure that these little people grow into responsible adults who contribute to the greatness of this country. Perhaps our most important charge. And as I was explaining earlier, the primary reason that I'm out here running, because as much as I want to be there and they want me to be there, I know that they also, even if they cannot express it now, they will down the road. They're going to want to know that Amy and I did everything we could at this defining moment of truth for this country. So hopefully, in some way, the way that we've conducted ourselves in business, in public service, in community engagement. I mentioned some of these families who are fleeing some of the deadliest countries on the face of the planet, showing up to our country in their most desperate and vulnerable state. 2 nights ago, our 10-year-old Molly and Amy were serving food at one of these shelters. It was really important for us, one, to do our part, because this is the community, El Paso, where these refugees and asylum seekers are coming. And two, really important for Molly to understand that there are people who are really struggling, and that she has a responsibility and a role to be there for them as well. But I'll tell you another story. After the president was sworn in, every year that I was in Congress, we would go to a different elementary school around Valentine's Day and pick up Valentine's Day cards for veterans that were hand-drawn by a 2nd grade or 3rd grade classroom, and then we take them over to the VA. And we want to make sure that those veterans understood that the generation coming up cares for them and is grateful for what they've done for this country. And this 3rd grade girl who's handing us the hand-drawn Valentines, who happens to be Mexican-American, says, "Why does the president not like me?" And I thought, what is that doing to her head and her conception of herself and what she's able to contribute to this country? When the president of the United States has called Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, he then went on to call asylum seekers animals and an infestation. Now, we would not be surprised if in the Third Reich, other human beings were described as an infestation, as a cockroach or a pest that you would want to kill. But to do that in 2017 or 18 in the United States of America, it doesn't make sense. Hate crimes on the rise, every single one of the last 3 years in this country. The day upon which our president signed the Muslim ban, trying to ban travel from Muslim countries to the United States in 2017, a mosque in Victoria, Texas was burned to the ground. Calling Klansmen and white supremacists and Nazis very fine people, there's an effect of that rhetoric. We don't put kids in cages under an administration except when that administration signals that it is okay to do that. And so, if ever our job was important, it is now to make sure that our kids know right from wrong, that we tell the history and the story of this country, the true story of this country to them. And for me, that is a story that we are always striving to become a little more perfect, that we are acknowledging our mistakes, the things that we should have done differently, that we can now do better. I used to think that we were on this inexorable trajectory forward, making progress. But if anything, election night in 2016 and every day that has followed has shown me that in the great history of this democracy, there's nothing that guarantees us another 250 years, nothing that guarantees us another day, except all of us willing to do our part. So let's make this commitment. At this very divided, highly polarized moment, whoever the nominee is come summer 2020, we will do everything we can to get behind her or behind him to make them successful, not just against President Trump, but for this country, for the best traditions of this country. Thank you for your question. Appreciate it. Okay. Cynthia is telling us that was our last question. I want to thank you again for allowing us to join you today. Kurtz for hosting us today. Appreciate you opening up the bar and all of you spending some time asking your questions. Hope to see you back before long, and please know that I'm grateful. Thank you very much.